Welcome to the Fat Fueled Family Podcast, where every week we talk about things like nutrition, training,
how to live a healthy and active lifestyle with your little ones, peaceful parenting, education,
and of course, mindset.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Keto Counterculture, at Fat Fueled Mom, and at Fat Fueled Kids, and search for Fat Fueled Family on YouTube.
To stay up to date with everything we're doing, sign up with your email at www.fatfueled.family and check out our blog for workouts, meal ideas, and all the other cool stuff we love to talk about.
Don't forget to hit subscribe.
All right, welcome to the Fat Fuel Family Podcast. I am Danny Vega, and I'm joined by my beautiful... She's looking. She can't take a compliment.
I
not
can't. I
once,
give him an ugly face
every single time. When she doesn't is when I know that we're making some serious progress in the Maura loving herself category.
But then you make such a big deal out of it that I'm like, whatever.
I know. Then you're like, oh no, I don't want attention. Get away. Yeah, that's true.
Very true.
It's hard. I'm learning. I at least I don't embarrass you in front of my family anymore and say, hey, everybody, look how beautiful my wife is.
Oh my goodness, that was terrible.
I know that was terrible. I'm sorry.
I'm like,
So we are super excited today because we have someone on that I probably quote or reference in almost every podcast I record or am on. I'm not saying that I'm perfect at kind of carrying out a lot of the stuff she talks about, but I definitely have changed a lot of what I do because of her. Ali Miller is an integrative dietitian and founder of Naturally Nourished, a functional medicine private practice. She's also the author of Naturally Nourished, Food as Medicine for Optimal Health cookbook, Reset, Restore, Renew, Real Food Detox program, and the Anti-Anxiety Diet. Through corporate outreach and as a public figure, Ali addresses nutrition misconceptions and myths, clarifying the extensive amount of confusing and conflicting information that can often saturate the media. She also teaches a really awesome Food as Medicine virtual Ketosis class that educates both patients and regular people, as well as healthcare practitioners. Ali's currently working on the Anti-Anxiety cookbook, and we're really excited for that one as well. And we're super excited to have her on the show today. Welcome, Ali.
Hey guys, I'm stoked to be here as well.
Awesome. Well, we hope you've thought about it. we always lead off with the question, what is the most critical problem you are currently trying to solve?
So currently trying to solve, I think that I will have more energy to put more hands on deck in this problem once I get the Anti-Anxiety Diet cookbook off to my publisher in May. But as we were kind of talking before the show started, I think that I'd really like to get involved more as a medical practitioner on policy and also get involved in some levels of access to well care versus sick care and what types of funds are allowed for use in functional labs, use of access to functional quality nutritional supplementation. You know, all of my products in the Naturally Nourished supplement line are what are called pharmaceutical grade. And yet, you know, even people that have flex spending and HSA, they can use those accounts for my services and they can use those accounts for my labs, but they still can't use them for vitamins, antioxidants, supplements that we see on a daily level are literally addressing the root causes of chronic conditions. So I think that that's where my kind of passion project has to go beyond getting the info out. How can we make it accessible? And I do that so often with, you know, my blog and my podcast on an information level, but let's talk about beyond information, the interventions. How do we make the interventions accessible?
Wow. I love that because that is a serious problem, especially as someone who has a family. And I'm like, it was just Desmond's birthday on Monday. So we got our yearly reminder for Desmond to go into his pediatrician where I'll be there for like 1 second and they'll ask me if my child eats healthy but at the same time, not ask me if he eats any protein, but they'll ask me if he has fruit juice and then look at me a little crazy, you know, and then push the vaccines until I'm annoyed. And then, so it's like one of these things where I don't want to pay for that. I don't feel the value. My kids are sick. It's like, if they do get sick, it's like, I don't even know where to go. I don't want to go anywhere for them to tell me some ridiculous thing and like, just give me an antibiotic or slap a Band-Aid on the product, slap a Band-Aid on the problem. And so, yeah, it's really hard, and like, we just found someone up here, a doctor that, he is a functional medicine doctor and he looks great. But yeah, he doesn't take insurance.
Cash. Yep.
Yeah, it's cash only.
Yep.
And so just, I think that's where it's at, because yeah, there are options now. We have people like you, and now with the internet, like Dr. Ken Berry and stuff like that, but insurance usually is either not going to cover it, or it's like those little details that make it not accessible. I totally agree.
Well, and the issue is, and now granted, it's been a long time since I've been in the allopathic world of healthcare, which is the fancy word for conventional.
Right.
Yeah.
But, we like with Stella, we work with a functional practitioner. And then of course I still integrate my own things, even though you should never be your own doctor or the doctor of your children, but still. And the terrible part is, and I will be able to speak more intelligently on this in the future, but one of the elements is, for instance, like pediatricians, they get audited on their percentage of the children that they see and the vaccines that they give. So because of governmental policy, and general practitioners get audited based on lipids still, and so if they're not putting their patients on statins and getting the numbers below 200 by the ATP3 guidelines that are governmentally mandated, they get dinged. And
They get less reimbursement?
Yeah. Yes.
Wow. That's terrible.
And again, that's kind of what I know of from back in 2011 before I went into private practice. But it's
10 times worse now.
It's gnarly. Yeah. And unfortunately, like I said, that's the idea, is that we're only reimbursing sick care, not well care. And that's why we have a multi-billion-dollar deficit and issue. And hopefully we start to see some change in that world. And like I said, accessibility to care to really address root cause is where it's at. But at least today, and at least, what I'm doing on my every moment is disseminating high quality medical level information to empower you all, I hope. And, then we can start to work upstream in the process.
I think it's super important. And the first two things that come to mind, I'm glad you said that. You said that diagnostics are being covered by insurance now, right?
They are. So I still, like in my practice, we're very small, and we still have a couple thousand clients. And so we still do fee for service, and then we provide a super bill for out of pocket reimbursement. And that generally is going to give, it just depends on the percent of the out of network reimbursement for the consultations that particular person's insurance, company has in their negotiations. And then on labs, we do allow both cash, and then some do go direct through insurance.
Well, that's good, because, on the healthcare side, as far as like testing, it's so weird to me that people are making clinical healthcare decisions without the information that they need.
Man.
It's so weird. Like the MRT food panel and the genetics alone should be something ubiquitous. It should be something that, if Maura would have known about her B12 issues, she wouldn't have been as tired growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, something simple like that. Yeah.
Yes, and it's a crime, unfortunately, that we're. This is one of my quotes that I had Becky pull as a screenshot. We're doing an episode on Naturally Nourished podcast on functional labs. It's an entire hour just talking about labs and information. And I said, dumbed down diagnosis, or using a dumbed down diagnostic measure creates a dumbed down, implementation or intervention, right? So it's like if you use TSH to diagnose someone with hypothyroid alone, and you're not looking at their thyroid peroxidase, which is the antibodies of inflammation on the gland, and you're not looking at reverse T3 to see how cortisol is in response, you're making a dumbed down treatment. You're putting them on synthetic levothyroxine, T4, and you don't even know if the TSH is off because they have a pituitary adenoma. Like maybe they have a tumor in their brain. And so it's like you have to just start to understand and think about, what are we looking at and why does it matter, and what is the mechanism of action, and getting away from practicing medicine in that, old mindset where grandma made the meatloaf and cut off the ends because it didn't fit in the pan. And then 2 generations later, we're cutting off the ends in a larger pan and we don't know why we're doing it. We're just doing it, It's like, that's
It's
the deal.
so true. Oh my gosh.
So
The T3 is an example of some people literally getting the opposite of what they need to get. If it's a reverse T3 or there's reverse T4 as well?
No, just reverse T3.
Reverse T3.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, we see often in the keto community, for instance, people that do intermittent fasting that can throw reverse T3 up, or like I mentioned, cortisol. Cortisol can directly interfere with the activation of T4, which is the inactive thyroid hormone, into that conversion of T3. And then stress response also can drive up reverse T3, because basically reverse T3 is a break to your metabolism. It's the body saying, like, we don't want to burn calories. Something isn't safe. And so it's a good check for that individual to understand, I got to modify lifestyle to mellow out, essentially, because I'm burning out my gland. I'm putting back this signal that's putting the brakes on my metabolism. And sometimes without that information, then the individual might go the wrong way and say, hey, man, I'm not losing weight. I'm going to go to 1 meal a day, and then that reverse T3 pumps up more. So it's so important to have access to information and then to understand what that information is telling us about the body, so we can use a combination of lifestyle change, dietary change, and then potentially nutritional supplementation to help those conversion pathways.
I think the other thing with policy that's super interesting in light of the newest, monster billion, however many dollars campaign, where they have, they kicked it off with the Eat Lancet recommendations, and that I foresee that affecting policy, but it could be a light at the end of the tunnel, because I think, at least in this country, what I've heard, Dr. Barry said this when this happened, and I was with him the weekend after it happened. It was like a bomb just went off. And what I think a lot of people are going to do, which could be super cool, is you're going to start seeing pigs and chickens and cows, in places where people have land, and people are going to go ultra local. You're going to see butchers popping back up. So if it does come to a point, which I don't want to be forced into the decision, but, because of taxes, on meat and stuff, people going local again, it could very well be a good thing. But if people are actively trying to change the policy and affect it, it's going to help us, because I know that, I don't like to call it the other side, but for lack of a better term, the other side is doing they're doing a lot of campaigning. So
yeah, it's you vote with your dollar. And I'm a huge proponent of the locavore movement, because, every dollar you put into your direct community comes back threefold. And so in a way, I think that kind of breaking down of the industrialized models by not supporting maybe expansion and growth policy in that sense, it could be favorable for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to be selfish on this question, because this one is about me, and I'm basically, you're my healthcare practitioner right now in this question.
All right, let's do it.
I am such I overthink things, and I'm always taking in all this new information, and I'm like, how do I apply this? So like my most current iteration of that is, I was like, it's my dipping my toes back into the paleo waters, because I haven't been paleo for like 5 years, and we felt so good. And so what I'm doing now is basically on Mondays, I really love what Mike Mutzel's doing with the Metabolic Mondays, finding a day of the week where I do a long fast and my protein's super low. And the only protein I'm taking in is fish that day, because I eat a ton of protein. And it's not because I think I need it. It's because I love it so much. So, I eat a ton of meat. And so I will do my 3 days a week where like I'm having, meat, and on non-consecutive days, go back and forth between paleo and carnivore. And I know that this is probably speculative, but I'd love to hear your opinions on what is the value of possibly not only changing the foods you eat, but also cycling, because I noticed that my calories are different too, because I'll track at the end of the day and I'll see like big changes. Is there an inherent value to kind of switching the way you eat? And I know this could also go towards like seasonal eating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good idea for sure. And, one of my favorite mantras is doctrine creates disconnect, right? So like if you're so hone in on like, this is the perfect diet, whatever it
Yeah.
is, like, oh, I got
Avocados are going to
my
kill you.
Right.
Yeah. Like, right. If it's like, oh, every day, you have XYZ, not only are you setting up your body to have potential immunological inflammation to the antigen that you're continuously exposing the body to, and that in turn can work against you, right? Like if you're eating one particular protein all 7 days a week, every day of the calendar, probably not a good idea. If you're, and I think like a protein sparing keto approach is the best way for sure to shred. I think that's kind of non-debatable as far as having a higher protein intake in the keto model and going kind of keto carnivore to shred. I think that definitely is going to be one of the best ways to cut. But there's also benefits to refill, as you know, right? So it's this kind of cycling in the body that can create the reset button. And we think a lot, even in men, I talk a lot about leptin hormone in the regulation for women and the influence that leptin has on the thyroid and ovaries, actually. And there is fluctuations with leptin in our menstruation cycle. And that goes into probably a sidebar topic of, carb cycling with hormone.
We're going to get to that.
We're going to get to that.
Mauda loves that. Yeah.
So sidebar that. Okay.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, good. We'll get there. But beyond that, men have leptin, of course, as well. And with anything, the hypothalamus, when a lot of things that I do come back to, obviously with the anti-anxiety diet and my functional medicine approach, to this idea of keeping the body's balance of the sympathetic and parasympathetic, right? So how do we try to regulate this high stress environment that we all are living in and not burn the body out? And we know that keto, one of the mechanisms of the ketogenic diet, actually does upregulate the HPA axis. And so there's controversy of whether that is beneficial or harmful on the adrenal glands and how that influences cortisol and what have you. But I feel that when you bring in diversity, when you shift your macros around, so let's say you're doing like a, classic keto where you're at like 30 grams of carbs. I'm talking more for a woman, let's say. So like 30 grams of carbs, 70 to 80 grams of protein, and 120 fat, right? As an example. If that's your go-to, I think it's most definitely advantageous to flip that around every now and then. Maybe a day looks like 120 grams of protein and only 50 grams of fat. And then maybe a day looks like 75 grams of carbs. I think you find your rhythm of what works for you 80% of the time, and that it's good either once a month or twice a month, potentially once a week. It depends on the metabolic flexibility of the individual, I would say, for sure. And with you, Danny, you have that because you're exercising, you got a lot of muscle, right? But for some people, I think a weekly shift might be too extreme, and it might take their body 3 days to get back into fat adaptation. So it's going to depend on the individual, but I think playing with both diversity within your macros and also your food selection is inherently beneficial for our metabolism.
Oh, that's great. And I take a lot of things into consideration, and I know that, people who follow closely and are listening to what I'm putting out there, like, man, I could really see that you're taking these things and applying them. Like our talk with Dr. Nicolantonio was amazing. The guy is just really smart, and I knew where he was coming from before we spoke to him. And one of the things that popped in my head was about a year and a half ago, I was talking to Dom D'Agostino, and I was like, listen, man, I am looking at my MyFitnessPal because I'm always tracking, and I'm like 90% saturated fat. I'm like, that seems weird and off. I know I'm not supposed to be mad about saturated fat. I know I'm not supposed to be scared about it. And this was even before I started reading about LPS and all the issues that may come. And I'm always seeing monounsaturated, no matter what diet you're on, seems to be less inflammatory or potentially inflammatory. So I asked him about that, and of course he was like, yeah, monounsaturated, you want to eat a lot more. And the other thing that I noticed, especially because bringing fiber back into my diet, like 35, 40 grams on a day like today, is that my ketones don't suffer. And people are worried about increasing their carbs, and we're telling them, not if you do it the way, we're doing it, like in the way that you propose to do it, is through real food. And you're getting these resistant starches, you're getting this soluble fiber that's producing short chain fatty acids. And like, oh, what do you know? I'm still in ketosis the next
also
day.
You're doing it like strategically too.
And
like
intermittent
around
fasting.
Activity, I'm doing it around my cycle and like using them in a smart way too.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean a cheat day. That's the problem, is that people are in a diet mindset. So they're like, oh, it's a cheat day.
Oh, it's cheat day.
Yeah.
No.
I'm going to eat carbs. Well, yeah, I'm going to have a pizza.
Term.
It's the worst. And people have asked me, should I have a cheat day? I'm like, if you're asking me if you should eat carbohydrates, then that's not a cheat. That just means that you're eating real food and you're testing how this affects your performance. That's not a cheat day. Yeah. People are like, carbs are bad. That's a cheat.
It's a metabolic reset. It's just a metabolic reset. It's and I find that, and I think you guys have too, that generally speaking, when you do these little resets, that you likely, that acceleration pedal goes deeper and harder than if you're at a stagnation within the diet, right? So you get this, I think I saw yesterday, Danny, you said you had like a ring out of 4 pounds or something like that, right? So it's like, there's definitely
I've never been able to explain why that happens though. I don't know why. With carbs, people eat carbs and they lose weight.
Yeah, so it's the water element. So in the initial onset of keto, most people lose very remarkably in that first week when they're first starting a ketogenic diet, because they're pulling out all that glycogen. So for every gram of carb, we hold 4 grams of water. And so what you lose the size of your fat cells. So your adipocytes, they shrink, right? And part of the contents of them are released in the body. And this is my big component of why with keto, it's so essential that we support detox processes on a biochemical level, because when we lose fat, we upregulate the release of endocrine disrupting chemicals or, other influencing factors that the body was holding in the fat cells to try to protect the vital organs from exposure of, right? So it's important to be mindful of this. And I think that, one component aside from the water loss, fiber, as you mentioned, is a very favorable component for detoxification. Arguably, do you need it every single day? No. I mean, I think we're all on the same page that carbohydrates are the most non-essential nutrient of the macros, right? But is there a potential favorable influence on short chain fatty acids, on butyrate? Is there potentially a favorable influence on our lipolysis or the actual breaking of fat cells? And that's what I think happens. Our adipocytes shrink in size, but we get this hydration surge from the carbohydrate back in, and that aids with the process of lipolysis. And so we tend to get this kind of ring out. It's like you refill the sponge and then you surge that pull. So it's a pretty cool thing to play with, assuming that, like you guys mentioned, right, you have emotionally broken up with your sugar addiction.
Right. Yes.
Because, I talked with Brian Williamson like 4 years ago, probably the first time. I think I was the first guest podcast I had done on Keto Evangelist.
That's awesome.
And I was talking about how I use carrots in my whole food keto approach. Like I was talking about this carrot bisque bone broth soup with full fat coconut milk, and how the entire recipe had a half cup of carrots. I mean, you're getting less than like a tablespoon, and that's even, I'm way more liberalized than that now, right? But he was like, oh, I don't know, man. He's like, if I even tasted a carrot, you'd find me binging in an alley eating a bag of carrots. It's like, it's just funny. I always remember that. And I'm like, yeah, I have to always have perspective that everyone has different levels of, food addiction. And so you need to take that into account when you're looking at self-experiment. And when I'm leading my virtual Food as Medicine keto program, we talk about carb cycling at class 5 specifically. We don't talk about it in the first 3-4 classes because we want you to get your mojo. We want you to get fat adapted and really understand how your body is working, break up with sugar, and get into that world where now this may work favorably versus, like I said initially, once a week for some people that aren't highly active and don't have a lot of musculature. Some people struggle and it takes them 48, 72 hours to get back into keto, right? So that might be like the person who, is doing keto Monday through Friday and then totally, right, goes on date night Saturday, Sunday, drinks too much alcohol, eats risotto and,
a bunch of
pizza.
Fat and carbs together.
Fat and carbs.
Yeah. That's not going to work well. It's not going to work favorably.
Right. Well, this is a perfect segue. I'm just going to let's just go there now. But let's talk a little bit about carb cycling. I mean, I've started implementing it, and honestly,
it's been like 4 months, right?
It's been, yeah. And it's amazing because when I miss, because sometimes I honestly just forget, which is goes to show like I don't have that. Like, I'm so happy that I don't have that food addiction thing anymore, because even some nights where I'm actually due for my carbs, I'm like, oh, it's hard for me to eat it sometimes. Like, I'm like, I got to force this apple right now for my hormones, you know.
Do it for the girls.
Do it for the girls.
We got this, ladies.
Yeah, and I missed like the ovulation one of the months, and then my cycle went short again. And
right back to 25 days.
Yeah, so crazy. But you also use, I could be wrong, and this is where I want like you to explain it, because there's something that occurs with leptin, and I don't know if you said leptin deficiency. I could be wrong.
Yeah, she did. I was so confused by that.
Danny was very
because I was like, wait, leptin makes you feel full. And why would a leptin deficiency cause the issues that I know you're going to bring up?
Right. So can go into a little bit about carb cycling, why we would carb cycle, you know, just, and how leptin plays a role in all that.
With sexual hormone too. Okay. So first off, leptin, right? So leptin is this known satiety hormone, right? And leptin is generally upregulated or expressed on a higher level with the ketogenic diet. When we eat high-fat diet, we tend to have higher leptin release. And yes, that's a component of what a lot of people call the keto high, right? But what I would attribute leptin to that. And most people, as they enter ketosis or, you know, are coming from more of a standard diet, have some level of insulin resistance. They generally speaking also have some level of leptin resistance. Okay. And so leptin and insulin have a lot of overlap in the trends that we see. So people that have higher amounts of body fat, for instance, tend to be more leptin resistant as well as insulin resistant. Okay. So as you go keto, as you're metabolizing your own fat as fuel, or, you know, or the fat that you're consuming in the diet, the exogenous and endogenous fat stores, you're going to be getting higher leptin expression. And leptin docks to many points in the body. You know, all hormone is like a lock and key mechanism, right? So that's the idea with insulin resistance. You're putting out insulin. Insulin isn't docking because of the inflammation going on the receptor site. So your body puts out more insulin, and that drives excessive body fat storage and so forth. Well, with leptin primarily docks with the hypothalamus of our brain. So like I said, everything comes back to the HPA axis. It totally does. So this is the part of the brain that also regulates basically our homeostasis, or our body's circadian rhythm. The hypothalamus regulates our appetite. In fact, we see women that have had history of eating disorders or like anorexia will have hypothalamic amenorrhea. Essentially, their hypothalamus tells their body not to cycle because they're in such a food insecurity. So when leptin docks with the hypothalamus, that tells us we're satiated. That's what gives us the keto high, and we lose our appetite. We're like, what's food, right? We've all experienced that.
Yeah.
So that's going on. But you also have leptin receptors on your thyroid, and you also have leptin receptors on your ovaries. And so there's a sweet spot of going from leptin resistance to optimized leptin function to leptin depletion. Okay.
And that's what it was.
Yes. So leptin is, again, and for women like us, Maura, who we don't have, you definitely non-debatably have more muscle than I do for sure, but I don't have a lot of body fat, you know? And so women that don't have a lot of body fat, generally, because again, leptin levels are more resistant or higher in higher adiposity or higher body fat, they tend to be a little bit lower leptin as is. So we get the higher leptin response, which helps with anxiety, helps with satiety by doing a high fat diet. But during our menstrual cycle, leptin levels decline during certain timestamps, and it's the secretory phase, and it's also going to be seen in onset of menstruation. And so I recommend for women that also tend to be low progesterone, which any woman that's under high stress, which I don't know any mother who isn't.
We've had a progesterone test sitting here for so long, because when we got the test, Desmond got hit, or Dean got hit. And then she yanked out her Mirena in the bathroom.
I'll just wait.
In December and January, I kind of told her, because I used to sell the Mirena, so I was like, just feel for the threads, and she pulled it right out.
Yeah, no biggie.
She's a savage.
Yeah, so now I'm like, now I'm going to give it a few months and I'm already feeling
because
great,
I know, I am
honestly.
pretty sure she is progesterone.
I feel a lot better though without it already.
But it's the carb cycling that's helping you experience that less, actually. And so there's a combination of what goes on there. So, right, our estrogen peaks first in our menstrual cycle, followed by progesterone. And progesterone tends to peak post ovulation, right? And so the idea is that if you had fertility of that egg that you released, that increase of progesterone about 3 to 5 days after ovulation is going to help the implantation. Well, at that same timestamp is when leptin levels are the lowest. So for someone that's already running a little bit borderline low leptin, that's going to hit heavy. And we don't often then get the full length of a 28-day cycle because we drop too low. The body goes kind of into this insecurity. The hypothalamus puts out alarms because there's no leptin docking. And that's going to create earlier, shorter cycle and likely an anovulatory cycle, meaning you're not ovulating.
Wow.
Well, I saw some of this, Ali, in my favorite study of last year. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it. It was the one, Dr. Ludwig was one of the authors, and it was the one where lowering your carbs increases your energy expenditure. And I noticed, and it could be the fact that, like you said, if they're insulin resistant, they're probably leptin resistant as well. So there's high amounts of leptin, but the brain's not getting the signal. And they observed that the people's leptin levels dropped as well as ghrelin, which was part of helping me understand this leptin thing a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. So that is the carb cycling. And then, that's for hormonal purposes for women, but there's obviously other hormonal purposes. There's not just leptin and ghrelin. There's what else is involved in that? And for a guy, I mean, I don't see a downside either. Is there any specific applications for a male that?
Yeah, I mean, so let's talk about symptoms of low leptin, because people ask me that all the time. They're like, well, how do I know? Right. And so you generally, when leptin levels are low, you might deal with insomnia. So, maybe you noticed first with keto that you're sleeping like a baby and all of a sudden you're having restless sleep. Okay. So that's a signal. We can also see anxiety as a signal. We can see increased hunger, like you're like waking up ravenous. It doesn't feel effortless to fast anymore. And this is the feedback, again, back to that like doctrine creates disconnect, right? Your body's trying to tell you that it's food insecure. And an interesting connection too of insulin and leptin, you guys, is that leptin is insulinogenic, meaning that leptin does, and that's why you reset with carb cycling, right? So you're strategic in the concept of, yes, if you're a woman that's cycling, you want to go about 3 to 5 days post ovulation. And you would have, generally speaking, I recommend somewhere between 30 to 45 grams of carbs. And that's on top of whatever your base is, right? So if Mara's base is lower than mine, her total carb intake might look lower than mine. And, it just kind of depends on what your body's adaptation is for the quote unquote norm. And some cycles I find personally as well. Some months I will cycle also on days 1 and 2. And some cycles I have zero desire to have carbs on days 1 and 2, and I just do 19 and 20. But I find if I don't cycle on 19 and 20, I always have a cycle that starts about 2 days earlier than a full length. And so I find that as a definite connection. And then for women that are like postmenopausal, I'm sure there's a lot of those listeners, I recommend that they carb cycle based on, think about how much body fat you have to lose first. So if you have over 50 pounds of body fat to lose, you likely don't need to carb cycle. So that's something to consider. And the other thing is, if you do, and you're getting those signs of low leptin, like the disrupted sleep, increased hunger, anxiety, then you might follow calendar or moon. So we think of like the new moon as the cycle, the full moon as ovulation. And for men, I've had a lot of guys that they get the leptin, especially the guys that try to do like a 5-day water fast or whatnot. I see a lot of them getting jacked on day 4 or 5 again. And these are guys that are like fit, right? So they don't have a lot of the fat reserves. We all have to think that we have this biochemical uniqueness and then anatomical uniqueness, which is going to express these protocols or these strategies differently. And the most important part of all this is listening to the feedback of your body. Don't white knuckle and grind your teeth through any sort of protocol. Some things hurt, some things feel uncomfortable for a moment, but you got to, at the end of the day, listen to the feedback and make recalibrations to work with your body in the healing process.
absolutely. That's something that would happen to me with fasting.
Mhm.
I would choose to do a fast, and it was just like, why am I doing this? I'm so miserable. Where other times it would be easier, I'm like,
Effortless.
this is easy, and I'm going to go with it instead of
Yep.
just like, okay, now I'm like literally just starving myself. Why am I doing this?
Go eat.
Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely.
Hey, everybody. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you guys know about a company we've been a fan of for over a year now. This is a really cool company because, number one, they're convenient. They make some delicious products, and they were also so cool when Dean had the accident. They said that's a great care package. The boys love their products. We love their products. They're convenient, and that's Real Good Foods. Real Good Foods has chicken crust pizzas, cauliflower pizzas. They have these awesome enchiladas that the boys love. Good products, low carb, keto friendly. And if you see the comparison compared to actual other packaged foods, there's no comparison. So they have a store locator. They're available at places like Walmart and supermarkets. I've also seen them even at Vitamin Shop, which is pretty cool. And if you wanted to shop for them locally, you can look at the store locator online. But we have a code, and it's FatFueledFam, and that'll give you $10 off your order. So if you're in a time pinch and you don't have time to cook yourself a nice home cooked meal, definitely look into Real Good Foods. They get the Fat Fueled Family seal of approval. And without any further ado, back to our show. All right. So my favorite topic.
Everyone else's least favorite.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Nobody wants to talk about this.
Black sheep of the keto community.
Yeah. But we got to do this. I mean, if people haven't heard, I think what is it? Episode 82, the why I hate non-caloric sweeteners. Yeah. We're going to put that in the show notes.
Cool.
But let's talk about sweeteners, Ali. Why do you hate sweeteners?
Gosh, man.
So there's so many. I know. There's so many reasons, truly. And I'll try to break it down. So one is just merely association and addiction, right? So
yes.
The idea that many people go into this lifestyle because they had some form of food addiction or sugar addiction beyond the metabolic shifts they're trying to make or the physiological anti-inflammatory or whatnot. So many people are sugar addicted. And the concept behind replacing one abusive boyfriend of Steve with Tom, who's erythritol or monk fruit or stevia, right? We're just redirecting the addiction, and we're still telling our mind and our taste buds that sugar is good, or sweet, I should say, to be accurate, that sweet is reward, sweet is good, sweet is the nostalgia ties and what have you. And it creates this hyper palatable flavor that does not allow us to channel savory or allow bitter or more pungent flavor profiles. And usually those are the foods that are most therapeutic for our body. So it creates this false sense of security. And my idea on a behavioral level is if you're using non-caloric sweeteners, every time you're at a wedding, you're going to want wedding cake and you're going to have to, run up a downhill escalator to fight that craving, right? But if you can break up with sugar, that looks disgusting. Like that to me, like frosting type of sweet.
It looks gross.
Yeah.
Like it literally makes I have like a full physiological shake from it because it just seems disgusting to me. It's hyper palatable. It's overwhelming to my body. Yeah. And I have zero desire. And I think that that's the only way to make a sustainable lifestyle shift to a low carbohydrate lifestyle is to break up with the flavor of sweet. And then there's actual metabolic components. Like there's GLP-1, which is in our taste receptors in our tongue and have factor on insulin release. So a lot of people go hypoglycemic when they consume non-caloric sweeteners. And then that makes them eat more throughout the day. And then, there's that actual psychosomatic impact of like the Pavlov's dog where, right, they ring the bell, you get the food, they ring the bell, you get the food, and the dogs are salivating in preparation just with that ringing of the bell. Taste of sweet, there are physiological processes that respond to that signal that do not work favorably for our bodies.
So good. I mean, and there's, like you said, I was reading all about this stuff and it's all there for people to see. Like, I know that most of the studies that they pick on sucralose because sucralose is one of the worst.
Yeah.
But you've seen stuff on erythritol, you've seen stuff on xylitol as far as gut, like sterilizing the gut a little bit, right?
Well, I haven't seen research study on gut sterility, to be clear, with erythritol or monk fruit. These are too new to have seen
Okay.
studies on a biome level. Yes, it's sucralose, and then saccharin, of course, has a bunch of terrible studies with tumors, like, a lot of brain tumors in rats and such. But I believe that erythritol is definitely sterilizing because of the way that it is processed. One of my favorite lines to say of we should be eating whole, real foods.
Yeah.
Anything that is chemically adulterated that you cannot process in your household, right? Like you can turn almonds into almond milk, right? And
Mhm.
and then
Yeah.
taking that a step further, to buy store-bought almond milk with carrageenan and guar gum, not favorable, right? That's
Right.
become a processed product, not a whole food. But you can still make almond milk. That still could be a whole food. You cannot, unless you have like a Breaking Bad lab in your garage, right? And like some
Yeah.
gas masks and some crazy equipment with hexalants and extracting chemicals. You cannot turn corn into erythritol. And, and most of these products come from low quality bases. A lot of them will say non-GMO, okay, that's fine. But just because it's non-GMO, does that mean that it doesn't have glyphosate residue? Does
Oh,
that mean that
yeah.
it wasn't,
Exactly.
so what was
That's
it
huge.
fertilized with? What is it sprayed with? And what's it been extracted with? So I think once you turn anything into a homogeneous white powder, that it's probably not going to be having any favorable whole food impact on the body.
Yeah, we totally agree. And we've seen it firsthand. Because of course, and it's funny because we were paleo first. We were before we ever became keto. So that was always something that was like a cognitive dissonance
That was
like,
bothering
in
Maura,
my brain.
and I was left
Yes.
Because I had already learned through paleo, and we would,
Weston A.
Weston A.
Price.
Price reading all of
Yes.
these things. I was like, this can't be good. Plus, I'm seeing it. Like the farts are crazy.
Well, that's sugar alcohols. Yeah. So that for sure. Like
I'm
we
like
do
that,
know sugar
yeah.
alcohols. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, that's not a favorable. Your body is not liking that, obviously. And then, yeah, it's like the regulation. And it's funny because when we took our kids off sweeteners and replaced it with apples, some dates if they want, of course, always paired with fat or after a meal, after they eat their steak, they regulate themselves so much better. Dean doesn't even finish an apple half the time now. He doesn't even finish it.
It's amazing.
It's so
like
wild.
magic.
And
Yeah,
it's funny because I see, sorry,
Go, you go.
just really quick, because a lot of people, the argument with the sweeteners, and like, I kind of get it, I guess, but it's like, you're still not breaking up with that abusive boyfriend. Cause a lot of people say, well, if you have someone who's like morbidly obese and like this can be a bridge, but it's like, is it really, if they're not, it's like so much more addicting. Like
So much
you're
sweeter.
not,
Yeah.
is it really, if you're still not breaking the habit? And it's so true. You want to get to that place. And we felt that like this Thanksgiving, I had no desire to even eat a keto treat, like nothing. I just didn't want to. And I was like, wow, I feel so healthy right now because my body does not even care for that flavor. And it's true. I see like a Publix cake or like a regular cake with frosting. I truly don't
It does.
think
It looks
that
disgusting.
tastes good.
It looks weird.
And it tastes disgusting as well.
Right. So there's that. I think that's when you get to a sustainable rhythm of a low carb diet, when you cringe at sugar. And you can cringe at sugar on a intellectual level when you're still eating non-caloric sweeteners, but truly on a taste bud level, you're not cringing on sugar. You're thinking it looks delicious, because you like that taste. And so I totally agree. And it's really wild because I even work with, children that have metabolic disorders like glycogen storage deficiencies or genetic errors in metabolism where they need to do keto beyond things like epilepsy. And, so they're in a tight 3-1 ratio where it means, 3 times in grams, right? And we already know that fat is 9 calories per gram, but not by calorie distribution, by grams. They have to be 3 times fat to 1 combination of carbs and protein, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're working in this population, I can still use whole food based keto treats with them. And that's my biggest argument for those parents is don't keep them sweet addicted, because there's that guilt thing, like you said, so you could use the argue of obesity or like this genetic population, right? Where it's like, this is their survival. And so they want them to have a cake at their birthday and things like that. But that's creating then when they go into teens and they have any autonomy, that's creating a really unhealthy relationship with flavor profiles and foods, because again, that's setting them up to crave those things. So if you can make The cake I think I just put out, which is the one with the beet powder. It's a cashew macadamia coconut oil based
I gotta
filling.
try that one.
Yeah, it's bomb, really. I think it's so good, and it has a nut butter crust. And the ratio in that is a 2-to-1 on its own. So all you have to add is some coconut cream, and it's beautiful. And it uses, I think, 3 dates in the crust, and then the inside of it, I don't think I even added any sweetener, or maybe it was 1 tablespoon of maple or honey in the entire 12 servings of the cake. So, I mean, yeah, pretty negligible there on carbs for sure.
And it's funny because if you were to actually give that to someone who's eating sweeteners, they would think it tastes gross.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're like,
our kids destroyed that. We made for Desmond on his birthday. You saw it, like the chocolate cake you made for Stella, and like it doesn't taste as sweet as if I were to use erythritol or something.
So good.
Right.
It's just so much more decadent. They're getting that nice chocolatey taste, and they loved it.
And all the nutrition. We didn't mention the fact that sweeteners are devoid of any type of nutrition.
Yeah, at least if you're getting raw and filtered honey, you're getting those benefits, right?
Right. So I mean, that's the thing to consider as well, right? There's not only mineral density, but like for honey, there's chrysin, which is going to help with aromatization process of maintaining testosterone and reducing estrogen dominance. We're also getting B vitamins. Exactly, you're teaching the body what whole real foods taste like, and you're ensuring that everything you put in the body has a mechanism of action that is health supporting. And when something, although, like I said earlier on, we may not know directly, I can't say with confidence that erythritol or monk fruit necessarily sterilizes the biome. But what I can say is erythritol is not metabolized, and it exits the body in the same form as it comes in. And we do know that with research studies, and that is what causes a lot of GI distress, right? And so there's just, I think it's too easy to use whole real foods. And especially when we're talking about children, there's no need to get their palates on these hyper flavors of any sorts. That only sets them up for processed products and not a whole foods diet.
Absolutely.
I love it. I think that's good because we've talked about it already, and I want to just reinforce it with the person who helped us start this path away from the sweeteners. And I think it's kind of absurd at this point in this day and age that we have to like do little disclaimers before we talk about the fact that we're putting, maple syrup in a recipe when the whole serving itself, like the whole entire serving, including the maple syrup, may have like 3 grams of sugar or 2 grams of sugar.
Instead of like 40 something sugar alcohol.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. And we're not talking about like Aunt Jemima pancake syrup with high fructose corn syrup, to be clear. We're talking about like literally tapped from a tree in Vermont, whatever, very whole. It has so many phyto compounds and benefits, and I think, it's kind of, to me, just a duh thing, but I think people need to start wrapping their mind around this concept that, yes, you might need a black and white grocery list to get started in your keto process, and you might need to put blinders on to think that quote unquote foods are off limit. But ketosis is a metabolic state, bringing this full circle into the conversation of how you can still eat upwards of 60, 75 grams of carbs and make ketones, right?
Yeah, I had in December, I had three days in a row of 150 not out of ketosis. And on Tuesday, I had 125, and the next morning, what was it? 1.0 on 1 meter. I'm looking at this new meter that they're putting out because it's less expensive strips, and one was 1.0 and one was 1.1. So
that's killer. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's the idea of what is our purpose and our point? What is the mechanism of action? What are we looking to support in our system? And listening to the feedback for sure is key. And in the beginning of all my programs, I even restrict, non-starchy vegetables to a half cup a day total with 2 to 3 cups of leafy greens, because I don't want those residual carbs getting in the way of someone's metabolic hustle to start making fat, because it can deter you. I don't want people listening to think that they can eat dates or honey in any form truly to start their keto process, because likely they will struggle. But to be clear, once you are fat adapted, everyone's going to have a unique kind of range or fluidity of their metabolic flexibility. And I think there's benefit to exploring that.
I love it. Well, here's another one. I don't want to say it's selfish, but it's definitely something I'm interested in because we both know Anthony J, and he's a good friend of ours. And he set off a whole other process going on with all of the plastics, and not just the plastics, just all the xenoestrogens.
Xenoestrogens, yeah.
And like one of the ones that I was thinking about, because I enjoy the Keto Brick and it has a ton of flax in it. And I know that I asked him, I texted him the other day, I was like, didn't you say that apparently, because flax is off the charts estrogenic and soy is under it, but it's orders of magnitude less. But from what I understand, the lignans, which is in flax, those are broken down better versus like the isoflavones in soy. And I know you like flax. So, I love Robert's product, and it's one of those things that I'm like, I'm not going to be terribly afraid of consuming a keto brick, as an indulgence every now and then, if it has flax. And what would you say to like the benefits of flax and how that, counterbalances this potentially negative thing where we're living in such an estrogen dominant society? People aren't like looking at their personal care products, their cleaning products, what they're eating, what they're storing their food in. Where does flax fit in because it is a real whole food, right?
Absolutely. And flax has a favorable influence on our estriol. So there's varied forms of estrogen in the body, right? There's estradiol, which is E2, estrone, which is E1, and estriol. And estriol generally has favorable antagonistic property on estrogen expression or estrogen dominance in the body. So when I'm looking at salivary hormones, I look at an estrogen quotient of basically their E3 for women, their E3 over their combination of E1 and E2. Generally in men, we only monitor estradiol or E2, more so looking at the connection of estrogen dominance and the connection of testosterone. But for women, it's obviously with risk for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, we're getting a lot more nitty gritty on the expression in the body. And we have seen, and I can send you a link. I'd be typing to find it, but there's a research study that looks at the increased expression from consumption of flax on estriol and influencing impact on estradiol.
Because estriol is very weak in the body as far as its estrogenic effects, right?
Yeah, and like
that's
I said,
why
it's
women
antagonistic.
are going through, if they're going through menopause, their estriol is higher, right? And it's not very potent. It's not giving them what they need.
Well,
or is it estrone?
Estrone. Yeah,
okay,
estrone tends to pick up in menopause. And estrone can also be higher in elevated body fat. But estriol is antagonistic. And by that, I mean that it's protective against estrogen dominance. So when I have someone that actually has if I'm looking at a woman and they're dealing with estrogen dominance, it could be for many reasons. One could be that they have too much estrogen in their body. So it could be, from xenoestrogens, or it could just be from their body's metabolic processing and their biochemistry. And so estrogen dominance can be direct, with making too much estrogen or having too much estrogen. It can be secondary to progesterone deficiency. And estrogen dominance can be relative based on their estrogen quotient. So if a woman has elevated estradiol, I'm going to be more aggressive and put them on like DIM, like diindol methionine, or maybe work with indol 3-carbinol. So these are different compounds that help to basically upregulate detoxification of estrogen in an excess, right? If they have estrogen levels that are normal, but their estriol is too low, or they have normal estrogen levels, but their progesterone is too low, I will work with flax favorably to actually help to offset that kind of relative estrogen dominance versus the primary estrogen dominance of having too much. Does that make sense?
That makes so much more sense. Okay. And I'm happy because I want Robert.
Flax, so I'm screwed either way.
Okay, that's on you, girl. No, yeah.
I do want him to do another product with another compound. I don't want to say what it is because then someone else is going to do it. But I don't want. But I think it would be beneficial to add that other one. But yeah, I just have thought about that. And flax is just one of those things that when you add it, like if you make some sort of recipe. It just makes things creamier.
Yeah, good in meatballs and like as a binder.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people that have egg sensitivity, you can do the tablespoon of ground flax with 3 tablespoons of water, whip that in a blender and get that kind of viscosity of a little bit of a binder. And the lignans that you mentioned are going to be actually higher in the whole seeds. So we may have heard, 10 years ago when flax kind of came on the market, that you want ground for more omega-3 fatty acids. Well, I really go for wild caught fish for omega-3s. I'm not a big fan of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids in the ALA form. I want that active EPA, DHA. So I recommend going for like the flax crackers. If you're using it in hormone balance, you're going to get more of the lignan expression. And you'll also get more of that kind of binding soluble fiber, which helps cleansing the gut. And that's the secondary area where we detox estrogen. So we detox through the liver and we also detox through the colon. And, that's where we look at like a gentler support for estrogen dominance would be like calcium D-gluconate or things that target that secondary pathway. And then that won't drive your total estrogen too low, because I also don't like people blindly taking DIM. Because then that can play a role with bone density and vaginal dryness and unfavorable, expression in females.
Gotcha.
So interesting. Awesome. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about supplementation for kids. Honestly, I wish that we could just make swabbing babies. I think DNA testing is so cheap now that I feel like we should swab babies at birth. Like I mentioned, I have, I'm homozygous for MTRR and then heterozygous for MTHFR. So,
but I'm also heterozygous for MTHFR.
Yeah, but
so
like the MTRR thing,
like
likelihood. Just blew my mind, which is the one that deals with B12. And I mean, I'm telling you, I never had energy. I was always that kid that I couldn't get out of bed. I just never had energy, and just that simple little change made such a difference. Yes. And then of course, Dean being my son, I've seen those behaviors in him where he's just like, I can't walk, and like supplementing for him with methyl B12 has helped. So, but what do you how do you go about this with Stella? I mean, I know you did have her DNA tested, but how can parents kind of, gauge this? Like, what should we be giving kids to kind of cover all the bases? And
well, I think the first thing you can conservatively do is in the household for all ages, but definitely for children, is remove fortified foods. Yes. Generally speaking, a fortified food is already going to be a chemical shitstorm. It's already it's taking a nothing and trying to make it something with synthetic vitamins, right? And the big thing you want to watch out for is, of course, synthetic folate. And folic acid, unfortunately, if you go back to baby formula, right? Yeah. Not only are there corn syrup solids and a lot of other garbage additives, but there's generally speaking going to be folic acid, which is not going to be favorable. And there's so many women that I work with infertility that their infertility clinic has them on the crappiest prenatals that have non-methylated bees.
Yeah, so ridiculous.
I used to see this all the time. There was only 2 brands that were methylated back in my day.
It's crazy. Out of control. And and so that's one thing you can start with is remove any form of folic acid on a supplement or on a fortified food. So including vitamin water that a lot of health people drink. A lot of people I see that have pretty clean keto will still do the 0 vitamin water or whatnot. Or even nutritional yeast is another thing that a lot of people that are doing a keto, dairy-free keto will use. There is non-fortified nutritional yeast actually, so you can use that if you'd like. But removing fortified foods is the first step, because then you're not going to create sludge or buildup, which can cause distress for an individual that has methylation genetic defects, right? And then you can preemptively support with methylcobalamin and methylated folate. My multi-avail kids is any supplement in my Naturally Nourished line is going to be in the most bioavailable form. We're talking chelated minerals, everything that's going to, so from magnesium, we want magnesium bisglycinate, that neuromuscular relaxer, versus the cheapos, citrate and oxide, which are just stool softeners. Right. And so, I think that it depends on the child and what they need, but a good quality multivitamin with methylated Bs is important. If your child expresses dark circles under their eyes, that generally shows liver distress. Wow. And so that's one way. In fact, we actually use a transdermal, meaning through the skin, glutathione for Stella, and she is GST1. Like you said, I'm nerdy, right? I mean, I know all her genes. Yeah. So
And that
she's
one, that's the one that you can't eliminate toxins, correct?
right.
GSTP or
So she's the perfect problem child for vaccines in the sense that,
Right.
she's actually homozygous MTHFR on the C677T, which is the most dominant of methylation. And she's homozygous on the GST1. And I think, thank God that I'm her mother, because I don't know what would have happened if she was just thrown into a standard plan of care. Right. So, we do methylated bees. We do for her also a probiotic, and I'm a huge proponent of that. And we still have her on a vitamin D. And then we do this liposomal transdermal glutathione. And I noticed actually in the month of from November to December, because I usually do it like 3 times a week. I think we had traveled and I just like never put it where it belongs in her bathroom, and I hadn't been using it. And the funniest thing, this girl's 2.5 years old, and she was saying, "Mama, my glutathione." And I looked at Brady. I'm not playing. Like she says that. And I looked at Brady and I'm like, dude, she's got like dark circles under her eyes. Do you notice that? And he's like, yeah, I was going to mention that. I go, mark my words. We're going to get her back on this cream. And in 2 weeks, she's going to have beautiful pink flesh under her eyes. And I'm telling you, like a light switch.
That's amazing.
So I mean, you can also use a physical assessment and see issues with child. If your child's acting out and dealing with like ADHD or attention deficit or behavioral disorders, it's potentially beneficial to work with. I would say 100% get them on meglysonate because their neuromuscular system needs relaxation signaling. And then you might even play with GABA as a tool instead of going on a medication world. And you most definitely want them to have a fat dominant diet. I mean, that goes without saying because blood sugar spikes and crashes are the kind of onset of behavioral issues.
That's so awesome. I need to get Dean on magnesium glycinate and GABA. I mean, he'll take it randomly.
Yeah, randomly. We give him some GABA calm.
Of course, the one that needs it the most is the one that's pickier with taste. Like Desmond, he'll do like an apple cider vinegar shot. He does not care.
Yeah, he's like me. If it's healthy,
he'll flex after it. Yeah.
If you tell him it's healthy, he'll have it. He doesn't care.
Totally.
But Dean is like, I don't like that one, and he'll like spit it out all drama. So I'm just like, I finally found like a methylated B vitamin that he likes. It's like a little lozenge, but I gotta find him. I'm gonna get that see if he likes the multi-available kids because
and the relax and regulate is safe for kiddos, and that's the meglysonate, and it tastes really good.
I'm gonna get that one then too.
I think that works well.
I'm gonna check that one out.
Now, speaking of GABA, I love GABA myself, and obviously, I think all of us are living lifestyles that are just like very non-GABA lifestyles, just, excitatory everything.
Coffee all day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the screens and the fast. But like recently someone, cause I was talking about the things that I've been liking, and I had to preface this with this whole thing that, listen, I'm doing all these other things. So I'm not just relying on this stuff to go to sleep. It's not like this stuff is putting me to sleep, but like, I like to do the calm, magnesium with some CBD, some L-theanine, and some GABA. And I was just curious to see what other people were doing. And someone was mentioning phenibut. Now, what are your thoughts on phenibut? And is it true that it's better absorbed than GABA? What's the difference there?
Well, first off, on the calm, Danny, you gotta switch that to meglysonate because I think that's a citrate form.
Oh, you know what? I think that one is it's not a citrate either. I take magnesium glycinate every day, no matter what, like 500 milligrams. Okay. It's actually it's the threonate.
Yeah, if we did that, it's because we like ran out or something.
I think it's magnesium threonate, so it probably has sweetener in it anyway. So I need to just stop it. So I've been mixing it with this other tea that I've been drinking, and it's this weird, cool mixture, but we still have our blind spots. Like, we're noticing sunflower oil in some of the stuff that we use, and we're like, crap, now we got to remove this too. But what is the difference between the phenibut and the GABA?
So I believe, and I'm not super well versed on phenibut, but I know it molecularly is a comparable structure. Now, here's the deal with all neurotransmitters that a lot of people don't understand, and GABA is very unique in this sense. Neurotransmitters don't cross the blood-brain barrier, okay? So, like, that's the argument about GABA, quote unquote, not working. People be like, it doesn't work because it can't cross your brain. Your blood-brain barrier is protected from if you consume it orally, that's not going to cross. But and I think I believe that's the idea between phenibut, is that does cross the blood-brain barrier because it mimics GABA, but it's not actually GABA. But I like GABA in the pharma GABA form or a fermented form, in a chewable form, because it works on our enteric nervous system. So our enteric nervous system is the second brain of the body, or our gut, right? And GABA and serotonin are predominantly made in our gut. And so when we take GABA in a chewable form, it does directly, we get that like butterfly effect of stress, right? And we can feel that in our intestines. Well, physiological stress response is really where GABA hits as a neuroinhibitory compound. And it does give a pretty quick, like 10, 15 minute influence. And it does correspond in the central nervous system. The enteric nervous system and the central nervous system are very well integrated. It does not cross the blood-brain barrier, but it gets feedback via enteric nervous system. So it's a indirect relationship of calming our body, and it does directly influence our physiological response via the gut. And I believe phenibut works more as like a receptor antagonist or a mimicking molecule. And I'm not extremely well versed, but
so instead of increasing GABA, maybe it's working against what's the other one?
Dopamine?
No, the glutamate. Maybe it's inhibiting glutamate somehow.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to that, but I do know, my go-to is GABA should be used pulsed, and what I mean by that is like at times of demand. It's
Right.
not one that you would use foundationally.
Gotcha.
You always want to think of like, where's the root problem coming from, right? So if someone's dependent on GABA calm to help them get through the day, I would start with what's going on with that individual's microbiome. Are they not producing enough GABA, right?
Yeah.
Or are they overexpressing dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine from the medulla of their adrenal gland? And those are those excitatory, right? So, or yes, is there a metabolic influence on glutamate? And that's excitatory, as we know. And so it's thinking more about root cause. And I would always go back to supporting the microbiome. And then, like you said, we know blue light increases dopamine and creates that's why it's addictive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, especially video games, and we know like social media scrolling, there's a dopamine hit on the brain. And, we like seek, we're like hunting, right? For that feel good addiction. And so you need to counter dopamine expression on a lifestyle to get better GABA expression. And CBD, you mentioned, CBD aids in GABA expression.
Oh, wow.
And so, and that's where the variance THC in cannabis increases dopamine. And that's why you right, stare at the fridge for an hour or whatever. Right. So like GABA and that's where people also with high dopamine can get anxious or paranoid, right? And that's the THC component. But CBD in a pure CBD form hits and upregulates GABA expression, and ketones help GABA expression. So I think working with the how to get the expression from the body, and then absolutely pulse in the GABA in an active compound at times of peaks of stress, because it's not going to be helpful for the body to be surging epinephrine or adrenaline, right? And so we can use it as a checkmate to high stress events, but we want to think foundationally of, if we're anxious, what's going to address the root cause. And that starts microbiome, and more like I said, I would always start with like magnesium as a mineral, because it has 300 plus other enzyme functions in the body, and you might help other things than just taking the downstream influencer.
Yeah, the way you say it, it just reminds me of like a rescue medicine, like using adrenaline, or epinephrine, or like a rescue inhaler.
When I'm on a play date,
it
rescues me.
I've had it where I've walked to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I just got hit like, oh my gosh, what the heck are you doing? You quit your job. You don't have insurance. GABAcom.
Yeah.
Go right back to bed. Go right back to bed, and I'm like, good to go.
Totally right. Racing thoughts. That's an exact time, and I think that's a really important. Okay, I looked it up. Phenibut acts as a full antagonist of your GABA receptors.
Wow.
And so it has anxiolytic properties, but it works more similarly to like gabapentin. So I think I always like to work more on a mechanism of action to drive a process versus on a receptor level to inhibit.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Okay, I think I'm gonna just finish this off. We're running a little bit long, and I wanted to end this because right now, I this whole keto thing is it's a nutrition thing, but it's also like a movement, and
Yeah.
I love that because anything that can get people on the path to lowering their carbs and getting into like ketosis and getting the benefits of ketosis is good. But I see like the state of keto it's a growing movement, and it's kind of scaring me to see like what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts? Because we both have, all three of us have, pretty large platforms. How do we ensure it doesn't get co-opted by the food companies, and just, unfortunately people don't try it because what's being shown is not the best way to do it. What do you think is the best way? Because I this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
And it's been hard to say, like, it took us a while to start saying no
Yeah.
to people that would
Yeah.
reach out. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just, especially me, like I hate confrontation,
I
but
just
I've
wish them the best of luck.
But I've just been, I've
Yeah.
had to be honest and be like, you know what? I'm sorry, but our family is just, we're not eating sweet. We're not having sweeteners right now. And
No, ever. I mean,
we're not
we don't
having
have sweeteners
sweeteners.
anymore.
And,
Yeah.
let me know if you come up with a formulation that
Yes.
doesn't have sweeteners.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a really cool, one of the newer keto ice cream companies that hit me up, and I said, I would be 100% on board if you make a plain that's actually plain because it looks like if you're using, grass-fed whey and you're using full-fat coconut and you wanted to use some vanilla bean paste, that would be a killer product that I could vouch for.
Yeah.
And
I think
and
part
all
of
you
it is the
need-
scoopability, right? So some of these sweeteners add to a
Yes.
texture issue, right?
Mouthfeel. Yeah, I know. But yeah, so I think that the best thing we can do to maintain integrity is stay with that concept of we are eating to nourish our bodies. It's not just from everything we've been discussing, right? We're not looking for a short-term fix, or we're not looking to quote unquote trick the body. We're looking to nourish the body on a foundational level. And that's what food as medicine is. It starts with eating whole, real foods that you can imagine growing, that are non-processed, that support metabolic processes and don't bypass or trick the body to get short-term gains in that period of time.
Yes.
And I think that when we can do that, and we can be also metabolically flexible, and we put whole food greater than macros as blinders,
Yes.
that's when we start to heal the body from the root. That's when we start to heal, when we listen to feedback, when we are open to modifying and, getting diversity within the diet, and, being open to the flow of the body. We're going to need different things at seasons. We're going to need different things in aging process, in demand process. And it doesn't have to be rigid. It should be fluid.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what we're trying to do. It's a little bit of a challenge because people want, no, that's not
Rules.
simple enough. Yeah, that's
people just want to be told
tell me what to do. We had that issue
Yeah.
with the Killing the Fat Field program, because I had to give one of the people who bought it, I had to give them a refund because we didn't tell them what to eat.
Yeah, it's like you got to figure
Like,
it
guys,
out.
this is a little bit more involved than that,
Right.
that's the thing, getting people to think. But like, I'm here, like, and I know you're the same way. You're like, just learn a little bit. You're going to learn so much about yourself if you just put in a little bit of thought into, just continuing on, like, maybe I should try this. Let me add this in. And how does it feel? Like, the carb thing is one that I think is glaring, because people may not even know that, especially if for some reason, and I believe that being in ketosis is very, very favorable. But like, you could very well be eating more carbs and getting more nourishment and still be in ketosis, and you don't know because you're like, you were told that you could only eat 20 carbs a day.
Right. Fear mongering.
Yeah. It's really weird. And then of course our obsession, and I'll be the first to say, I don't even know why I test anymore. I really don't. I've learned so much. I mean, I guess this month, to see like what happens, but like, so people are so obsessed with the testing, and why are we testing? Why are we even testing? Well, we want to know what our ketones are. Okay. Why? No one even really knows. So I think that's a good point.
And we all still say, right, does it higher in the blood mean that you're utilizing, or that your cells are at capacity? We still don't really fully know. But what we do know, and I think that's the best kind of, closing point, is quantitative information, whether we're tracking on a food tracker and getting macro numbers, or we're tracking on our meter, right? Or whatever it is, quantitative is information. It is not going to tell us if our body is thriving necessarily. And we need to make the qualitative connection to the variables that we're doing. So it's a variable in our exercise strategy, a variable in our sleep patterns, a variability in our macros or food choices. Maybe we're on an elimination diet. And you take that qualitative to layer in, and that should always sing louder. Like, what's happening with my skin? What's happening with my GI? How is my bowel motility and formation looking? How am I feeling rested in the morning? And you take all that qualitative, and then you can kind of be detective within that quantitative data. But quantitative data is not going to get you to thrive mode on its own.
Yeah.
So good.
So good.
Well, Ali, the last thing, of course, is we want everybody to know, if they don't know already, how they can find you and anything new that you got going on. We know you got the book, but yeah, please use this time to inform our audience about that.
Yeah. So everything on my platform we try to keep it really simple, at Ali Miller RD. So Instagram and Facebook is at Ali Miller RD. My website is alimillerrd.com. And on there you can explore, I have a tab called Books and Programs, and that's where I have my 10-day real food detox. I have a Beat the Bloat cleanse, which has a dysbiosis and candida protocol, as well as supplement strategy. And I have, as I've mentioned, my virtual 12-week food as medicine ketosis program. And then I also have my anti-anxiety diet and naturally nourished cookbook. And the anti-anxiety diet cookbook should be coming out this fall. I'm super stoked on that. And I think I will be launching a virtual class with that as well, that kind of pulls both, has some cooking demos and some, more interactive video footage. And for accountability, I'll say I'm also, I think, going to relaunch my YouTube channel by the end of the year.
Good luck. It's so hard. I know. Trust me.
Put it out there.
Okay. Well, now, that's what we've done too. And we have 7,000 followers or something, and we weren't even doing anything. And now we're it just makes sense. There's YouTube people, there are YouTube people out there. They're I'm a YouTube person. I only watch YouTube. So it's you gotta you want to get the message out.
Constantly uploading content.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, Ali,
awesome.
Thank you so much for everything. We're just so happy to have you on, and, we wish you the best.
Oh, thank you so much. I so love collaborating with you guys, and can't wait to see you in a couple months at KetoCon.
Yes.
Oh, so exciting.